Welcome, welcome. My name is Peter Leyden. I'm the director of the New Politics Institute. And for those of you that don't know the New Politics Institute, it's a think tank that's helping progressives understand the changes in technology, media, demographics in the country, and how that's affecting the transformation of politics. I run this out of San Francisco, so it's in town right now, and that's one of the reasons I'm the only guy without a tie on here, so I'm sorry, the California guy. We're an affiliate of NDN, and for those of you who don't know NDN, NDN's one of the leading progressive think tanks and advocacy centers here in Washington. It was founded by Simon Rosenberg, who's the president of it as well, and Simon is also the founder of NPI, which is that I run now. And we are, both organizations, welcoming you here to what is going to be a terrific event here on the Uncharted political terrain of 2008. And we want to welcome everybody here in the audience. This is about as capacity of crowd as we can get. I think we've maxed out on all the chairs, and for fire hazard reasons, we can't bring any more in. So it's but great for coming out here. We've obviously struck some kind of nerve if people want to talk about this. We're also going to welcome our, we always video this with Politics TV, web video. And so we'll be having this out on the web within a couple days here. So we want to welcome that audience as well. And we have C-SPAN here, special guests. They come to some of these. And it's great to have them on as well as other people in the media. So thank you all for coming here for this terrific celebration we're going to have today of what is going on in politics. Now, our perspective is, you've been getting a lot of the day-to-day kind of look at the horse race. You've been looking at the weekly kind of obsession of the media. A lot of things, what we're trying to do is step back a little bit from that, take stock, look a little bit more at the big picture, and understand the kind of the higher strategic terrain of what's really happening in this really historic election. And it's one of the things that Simon and I have been doing a lot of. In fact, as Simon mentioned, we laid this out in the December issue of Mother Jones, end of the year here, a story called The 50-Year Strategy, in which we basically took, which you can basically get at the front door here, we've got copies of it. But it was really looking from a big picture strategy to what extent we're watching a fundamental, a serious collapse of the conservative brand, creating a political opening that really is a rare thing in American politics, but also how the rise of the use of new tools is really transforming the way we do politics, how the involvement of new constituencies, of a range of different new constituencies, but particularly young people we look in this article, and also Hispanics, are changing the whole calculation of politics. And how this is also, politics is now starting to address the next generation of big issues, 21st century challenges. And how all three of these major structural things happening in politics are coming together in this 2008 election. And so, excuse me, so we're not really just talking about a 2008 election, but in fact we're talking about a really new era here of politics that could be opening up. And that's what this piece is about, and we're going to actually reflect a little bit on this in the discussion here with the folks here, that kind of framing. But before I just want to say this, just to remember, when you take this step back, big picture perspective, we just have to marvel for a minute here on what we're really able to witness in this election cycle. I mean, this is such a rare opportunity to see this fundamental change happening in politics. I mean, on the one hand, we've got just look at how much money has been raised, historic levels of money being raised. Just look at how many people are able to participate through these new tools of politics on a level that we haven't really seen. Look at the new media. We didn't even have web video barely 4 years ago in the last cycle, and now it's actually playing a role. Text messaging wasn't even happening. It's starting to happen now. And to help us understand that kind of shift that's going on here, among other things, we've got Joe Trippi, who, those of you know Joe, Joe was really one of the pioneers who really started this whole shift of politics in the 2004 cycle with Howard Dean. He's just off the Edwards campaign, where he's the chief strategist there and really was bringing it to a higher level. And he's going to be able to really talk on a level that nobody else in American politics can today about what kind of new era that we're entering into in this kind of thing, give an assessment of that, and also look towards the general election of how that might fare with the Republicans. On the other hand, there's been incredible levels of participation in our politics with women, African Americans, particularly energized by the candidates, but also we've been seeing an incredible number of young people coming into the polls, people that normally you think of young people as more alienated, cynical about politics, but in fact we're finding just the opposite, a real energized millennial generation, as we talk about them, taking a higher share of the electorate, but also Hispanics. Hispanics has been a huge kind of shift in politics, both in the Democratic nomination process here, but also in the general. And to do that, we've got Andres Ramirez, who's going to basically talk to us about that particular shift in politics. Andres is now the new head of the Hispanic Strategy, what used to be considered the Hispanic Strategy Center. It's essentially the Hispanic Studies section of NDN, and he is replacing, for those of you who know, Joe Garcia, who's actually running for Congress now down in Miami, and is unfortunately left us. But Andres is going to have a good way to frame that. The third kind of thing that's happening, I mean, there's all kinds of extraordinary things happening in politics beyond those big kind of things. We've got the collapse of this conservative brand. We've got a kind of a trying to transcend race in politics, trying to pull together a new map of the electoral map of politics. And for a lot of these things and many others, Simon Rosenberg, as I already introduced, is also going to touch on all the other big themes, or many of the other big themes that are coming together in this historic election. And he'll be doing that. And then the final one we'll be talking about is it's not just about the presidential election, as big as that is, and as innovative as that is. But in fact, it's really also, we have a big opportunity in the Senate, huge number of openings there, the House, and to what extent we've got, is there going to be a transformation or a big shift in the Congress as well coming in the fall? And we've got with us there Amy Walter, who is not here right this second because she's on deadline at Hotline. She's the editor-in-chief of Hotline, the National Journal, and she will be coming in momentarily, and then she'll slip in and be able to talk about that. Terrific panel, a great group. They can talk about anything. I'm not going to shoehorn them in there into that. Those are their boxes so they can roam wide. And there are people in this audience here that I know could just as well be up here. So we're going to have plenty of time of discussion after this. So each person is going to basically do 10 minutes about their space, give their reflections on this election, and then we're going to basically open up to all of you. Now, before I basically jump right into it here, I do want to put one more piece of context in here, is that this event is in the context of another kind of event that we're going to be putting on here literally 3 weeks from today. 3 weeks from today, we're going to be doing an all-day event, essentially a conference, you could say, at the Capitol Hilton, and it's basically going to be called A Moment of Transformation, a look at just how big a change is coming to politics, America, and the world. It seems like a lofty title here, but I want to just put it this way. As much as we're talking about the transformation of politics today and how fundamentally and how amazing that is, the transformation in politics is really part of a even larger transformation going on here in America and the world as we kind of transition to the 21st century. There are shifts in technology right now, not just computer technologies, biotechnologies, clean energy technologies that really are on a scale that is really starting to disrupt, maybe make a big impact on how we can run the economy. The economy itself, even though we've been talking about globalization for a long time, we have now hit a point in the global economy where we are so interconnected globally that it is really fundamentally altering the way we run the economy here in the States and having repercussions all the way down to how people get paid at the very lowest level. We have to reframe our economics around this fundamental economic restructuring. World power is being shifted. With the rise of China, India, and others based on this kind of economic reshuffling, the 21st century, early 21st century geopolitics is going to be very different. And for what we're doing for this day, oh, here's Amy. Great to see you. So what we're going to do for this day is have experts in all these different fields, China experts, energy experts, all kinds of folks, come and talk about the transformations in their fields, what they see as literally historic level transformations happening in their fields, and we're going to start to think through how this affects politics. Because one of the themes of politics has been change, big change, and even transformative change. It's been the rhetoric, particularly on the Democratic side. It's really starting to resonate with voters. It's exciting a lot of people. And so that event, we're going to start to think about the implications of what really this means. When we talk transformative change, what are we really talking about here? And to what extent in this next cycle, after this next election in November, are we really going to see an era that will rival maybe on the handful of other times in American history, big structural shifts in our society, economics, foreign policy that refashions how America relates to the world and how Americans actually will thrive or not in that world. That's the kind of level, big picture we're doing there today. So from the meta of 3 weeks from now, March 12th, we also have some flyers on this. March 12th, on your way out, you can take this or go to our website at ndn.org or newpolitics.net, get more information on that. But now we're going to turn back to what is in and of itself a massive transformation. One that's brought you all here today is to talk about this historic election and the big picture going on here. And to start it off is going to be Joe Trippi. I already introduced him, but I did want to say one last thing about Joe. Joe, besides being in the Dean campaign, Edwards campaign, a great authority on this in many different ways, he was one of the founding fellows of NPI, the New Politics Institute that Simon founded in the summer of 2005. The idea with that was there's nobody in the country who really got the big shifts going in politics at that time better than Joe. He helped found this institute. And even today, we would say there's still no better authority on this whole stuff than Joe. So, Joe?
Thank you.
Why don't you?
Do we have to do the stand-up thing?
If you want to stand, it would be nice.
Okay.
Oh, no stand?
Okay, because I didn't want to. I'm sorry. I've never been good at the etiquette. I've never been good at etiquette. And Amy knows that better than anybody here, I think. But Well, thanks for having me, and thanks all of you for showing up. Amazing crowd. I just want to start by saying that something I talked about a lot in 2004 and 2003 was that we were witnessing a real move from top-down media, just broadcast in one-way media, to bottom-up technology that was building social networks, and there was ability for people to come together and work together and make real change. And I think when you put it in that context, I mean, what I was saying in 2003, 2004 was it was sort of like radio being usurped by television, but just not quite ready yet. Sort of like the 1960 where television was just coming into to form, and there were 3 black and white stations, and the country was still used to making decisions by listening to the radio. We're seeing this big shift. It started 2003, 2004, at least in terms of politics. And in that world, every campaign, post-television campaign, 1960 on, every single one of them has been top-down. Every one of them, command and control. The Republicans are much more disciplined at that than Democrats tend to be, but it's all command and control, top-down. And in that world, the greatest top-down campaigners in history, in our democracy, are the Clintons. They are better in our side. They are better at it. They created the biggest top-down money organization in this country, raising over $130 million, most of it maxed out $2,300 contributions this cycle. They have a network of elites in the establishment that, unlike anything since maybe Walter Mondale of 1984 and better. And what is competing with them is the second bottom-up campaign in history, post-TV. The Obama campaign, which looked at this thing completely, or for the most part, bottom-up, building a grassroots, netroots organization, and raising its money the other way, for the most part, bottom-up, $100 contributions or below. And what you're seeing is that it's not just that top-down politics is in trouble. This isn't a normal top-down campaign. This is the best top-down campaign, the strongest one ever put together. They've controlled everything since '92, and they've built a top-down campaign like none other we've ever seen. And what is competing with them isn't another top-down campaign. It's the second bottom-up campaign that we've ever seen. And in the space of 4 or 5 years, because of one, the candidate, a candidate and a campaign staff that understood that the bottom mattered and spoke to the bottom and empowered it, and didn't ridicule it like the top-down campaigns tended to do in 2003, 2004, and is now potentially a mistake being made by the Clinton campaign to ridicule the bottom as it tries to rise. That you have all these tools beyond, so you have to have the candidate, you have to have a campaign staff and consultants who understand empowering the bottom is important, and then you have to have the tools. And the tools that they've built and that are available since 2003, 2004 is pretty astonishing. Let's start with a couple of facts. When the Dean campaign ended, there were 1.4 million blogs known to exist. There's now over 7 million. So in that span, it went from 1.4 to 77 million blogs, I think. That's just blogs. And there's YouTube, video really didn't exist that much, as pointed out. Didn't exist that much in 2003, 2004. Was just literally started, and broadband wasn't as out there as much as it is today. We didn't have MySpace, Facebook, any of the social networking tools were pretty much either non-existent or just starting to get their footing. And the primitive tool, I was talking just before this, we were literally, now I think a better way of putting it was, and I don't mean to put us in the Clark campaign or the Dean campaign and with the Wright brothers, but we were like the Wright brothers. this flimsy little thing with a few propellers compared, and just 4 years later, they're landing on the moon. They've literally gone, the tools and what this ability to decentralize and do it from the ground up has done for the Obama campaign and what they've done. Let me just make two or three ways that you can see it easily. She raised more money, Clinton campaign raised more money top down than anybody has in history. I think only 10% of her donors have not maxed out to her as of today. The Obama campaign has raised more money than her and did it with only 3% of their donors maxing out to them, and the majority of their donors being low dollar donors over the net. They raised $37 million in the month of January, most all of it from $100 or less people, which means right now they're probably hitting that again and doing a redo. The caucuses, the whole reason Obama has a delegate lead on pledged delegates and from the contests is because of his massive victories in caucus states. That's because decentralized, having thousands of people in those states who are volunteering. They just, yesterday I read that they have 150,000 volunteers in Texas. Texas is a third caucus, 2/3 primary. So I'll make you a prediction right now. She's in deep trouble in Texas because if he beats her by 30 points in the caucus, she has to beat him by 16 points in the primary to win Texas by 1 point. I'd give him the odds on that. And the reason is with these decentralized tools, these ability for people to sign up and plug in to paid organizers who know what the hell they're doing as they organize a caucus state. The Obama campaign is something just unbelievable and strong in those states. There's no way that a top-down campaign could possibly compete with that. So on money and organization, they're getting totally beat by this. And now let's go to superdelegates, elected officials. When they start hearing from the thousands and thousands of people in their districts saying, I'm for Obama, I'd like you to be for Obama, and then that versus the phone call from Bill Clinton, the top-down tactic of how you move a superdelegate. I'm not sure on any of those three fronts that the bottom isn't going to defeat the top. I will say this now, and then turn it over. I'm not saying that today that the Clinton campaign's finished. I am saying this, that the top, no one will make the mistake ever, the blunder ever again of running a top-down campaign in the Democratic Party, a solely top-down campaign. It is the biggest blunder that I've ever seen. I do not understand why the Clinton campaign ran the campaign they ran and solely ran it pretty much top-down when she could have won a change campaign from the bottom and attracted people. She hasn't done it, won't do it. And either that blunder is going to cost her the nomination and Barack Obama will win. If she somehow comes back and wins this thing, it will be the last top-down victory, I think, in the party. There is no going back. Tools are becoming too strong. The bottom and the grassroots in this party will always be there now in a way that can connect, and candidates are not going to ignore that ever again. You're seeing the last one, I think. So
that's fantastic.
Because I have 30 seconds left. I could use it.
He hit it perfectly. Thanks.
With that, I could do a commercial. No.
That's fantastic. We're going to have plenty of time to talk and ask questions, but what a great way to open up. Next, I think let's pass it if you feel like you're oriented enough. Are you ready to go? Amy Walter, we introduced you, I think in absentia we introduced you, but to remind everyone, she's the editor-in-chief of Hotline and has been a longtime commentator on politics and calling early congressional races, all kinds of things with great foresight and precision. And we just was hoping you could take 10 minutes of your own reflections on this historic election and along the themes we're talking about. And Amy.
Well, Joe set me up.
Oh, you turned on?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. And Joe set me up quite well because this is reminding me, this election, and I've written about this a lot, this idea about as we all know, politics is all about timing, and whether or not we are seeing fundamental shifts in the way, as Joe pointed out, campaigns are going to be run, how they're going to be covered, how candidates have to continue to look forward in the next few years, or are we seeing simply a unique moment in history where all the forces came together at once? Now, whether or not we go to Joe's point about this was a mistake in the way that Hillary Clinton has run her campaign versus Barack Obama, let's start off with this. He had no choice but to run the campaign the way he did. Her decision to run the campaign she did, I think she had very little choice either. We can argue about whether she could have run as a change candidate. Yes, I think by the mere fact that she was a woman gave her an ability to talk about change that somebody who's already been in the White House, who's seen as part of the establishment, wouldn't have been able to get to. If this were Bill Clinton's nephew, wouldn't have had the same ability to be a change candidate. And at the same time, there was no reason earlier to believe that campaigns were going to be run that differently than they had in the past, nor were they able to tap into that in the way that Barack Obama could. In 2006, I remember having this debate that entire cycle about whether what we were seeing that year was because the environment was so strong, right, that it was pushing Democrats ahead on so many levels, that could the Republican, basically the roadmap and the strategy that they had used successfully year after year after year, which is, the sort of outwit, outlast, outplay, but usually it's outspend, that you can spend your way basically out of any bad political environment. And that because these contests, these districts had gotten so balkanized that there was no longer a sense of a national campaign where House races and Senate races sort of flowed with what was ever happening at the top of the ticket, that they were in each individual, there could be 50 or 60 separate races that didn't necessarily connect to the big national environment. What I came to discover, though, was that ultimately the environment wins. All right, Mother Nature won out in 2006, and clearly I think this election is showing the same thing. Everything that we're seeing, whether it's President Bush's approval ratings, the historic lows in terms of approval ratings of Congress, direction, the very low optimism that voters have about the direction of the country, the voter ID, that party ID where for the first time since 1991, Democrats have a 20-point advantage. I mean, well, let's say this. Nobody's had a double-digit advantage, Republicans or Democrats, since they started asking the question about whether you consider yourself to be a Democrat or Republican. And after the 2006 election, we saw Democrats open up a 20-point gap. So running campaigns the way that they were run in 2000 and 2004, the let's turn out our base and hope that we at least split independents, that's no longer the way that these campaigns are going to be run. My one caveat to all of this is the way Obama's running his primary does not necessarily indicate that it's the way he can win the general election. And so when I look at what has happened, especially in the last two elections, so let's look at what happened in Virginia and Wisconsin. The attacks on McCain right now are that, he has a problem with his base, he has a problem among conservatives, Rush Limbaugh hates him, Laura Ingraham hates him, whoever it is, and he is going to have real trouble getting that base to come and turn out and vote for him in November. And for as well as he may do among independents, is that going to make up for the loss among conservatives? I haven't seen anything, and maybe I'm missing something, but I haven't seen anything in any polling, at least to this point, that suggests that, one, Republicans don't like John McCain. He still has incredibly strong approval ratings. They don't change from liberal to moderate to conservative. That voters are choosing, self-identified conservatives or evangelicals are choosing Huckabee because they hate John McCain. Maybe it's just that they simply like Huckabee more and they have an opportunity to vote for him. But what I think is more problematic when you look at where McCain fell short in Wisconsin and Virginia was among independents. He didn't win independents in Virginia, and he only took 47% of the independent vote in Wisconsin, even while carrying Republicans by a significant margin. Why? Because Obama is appealing to those independents. He is taking that sort of moderate independent vote that we all have assumed that McCain has an easy access to, and has stolen that in the primary. And Obama, as we all know, is winning those by 30, 40 points, those independents. This is why, and we go back to Joe's point, that Hillary Clinton then running a traditional Democratic primary campaign isn't going to work on independents. One, because they already have a perception of Hillary Clinton that has been rooted. That's not very good. Her disapproval ratings among Democrats are quite low. Among independents, as we know, they're bad, right? Her disapproval ratings among independents are probably upside down, 48%, maybe close to 50%. So we don't know whether Hillary's attacks on Obama aren't working because they're not effective, or because as a messenger to those independent voters, she's just inherently flawed. So of course they're tuning her out. I don't know if they're going to say the same thing about McCain. Again, he's not the same candidate that she is in appealing to independent voters. He starts off with a better reservoir of goodwill than she did, or does. And the more that Obama, if you watch him campaign after campaign, day after day on the campaign trail, what I saw last night and what we're going to talk about a lot in Ohio and Texas is his ability to sort of get in with that lunch bucket Democratic crowd. But he's doing so in some ways by moving further and further to the left on some of the very issues that John McCain and Republicans are going to bring up later. The tax and spend liberal. He's the most liberal senator in the entire United States Senate. Going back to Joe's point, the question isn't, to wrap it up, is whether that's sort of the old school attack too, right? If what we're assuming is this is a whole new campaign, you can't go back to the old bromides that we all always had, Democrats attacking Republicans on Social Security, Republicans attacking Democrats on taxes. And when you look across the board at how strongly Democrats start this election, even on issues like taxes and the deficit, it may not work as well this time, that if McCain is going to undermine Obama, he has to be more creative than the same old tax and spend, in the same way that Democrats in the 90s started to lose the efficacy of the, Republicans are horrible on Social Security, they're going to make your grandmother eat cat food, they're awful. And at some point, seniors and others just tuned it out. But I do think that making these leaps of these assumptions here that Obama's success in the primary automatically translates to an advantage in the general, I think is one that should be looked at much more closely. So I'll leave it there.
Terrific. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Amy. Fantastic. Now we've got two of our speakers opening up, and we're going to go to the third now. Andres Ramirez, we introduced him before, but I'll just say it again. He's the new head of NDN's Hispanic Strategy Center. He is an expert in Hispanic turnout, Hispanic politics, all the different sides of that, as well as policy and immigration and others. And he's going to be talking about the impact of this new and growing constituency on the election so far. Go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. Well, thanks for introducing me, but making me follow Amy is probably not the best thing. I don't know how anyone can follow her expertise, but I'm going to do my best. As Peter had mentioned earlier, what we want to do today is not only take a look at the day-to-day of what's going on now, but take a historical look of what's happened with Hispanic voters in the election process, and take a glimpse of what's happened so far through the 2008 primaries, and hopefully take any glimpses we can into what that will translate to into the general election for 2008. So what I'm going to do is I actually have a slide presentation that I'm going to go through, and one of our staffers is going to help us go through this. So we're going to start just with a brief history of the Hispanic population. One of the major issues that we feel at NDN has been impacting and motivating Hispanics to vote, which is immigration, and move through there towards the electoral participation. So if we go to the first slide going on, we see here that U.S. Hispanic population, and I should just, before I move on, we have most of this information available on our website at ndn.com under the Hispanic Risings report that you can download anytime. And we also have a separate study that we just released last week, which is also available for you to download. So almost all of these slides will be available there. But if you guys need any more information, just touch base with me after the event today, and I'll make sure that I get you my card so we can get it to you. So I'm not going to read everything word for word because we all know how to read here. And I only have 10 minutes. So obviously, first point, there's been historic waves of immigration in the United States. Hispanics now are the largest minority in the country. The census reports that now Hispanics among adults, that a majority of Hispanic adults now speak Spanish or grew up speaking Spanish, as opposed to grew up with an English-speaking background. Majority of Hispanics in the United States are of Mexican descent, followed by Puerto Ricans and Cubans. And then you have a remainder from throughout the United States. And then also just one of the key differences that we'll talk about is the Hispanic vote, outside of just differing between your nationality, also differs between the states and regions you live in. There's a very clear difference between Mexicans who may live in Georgia or in the East Coast versus Mexicans who live in East LA, and even Mexicans who live in East LA versus Mexicans who live up in Northern California. I mean, there's just a very clear differences between regional Hispanics, so just keep that in the context of what we're talking about as well. So the last point focuses on as well that, of the 13 million registered to vote, that several of them are foreign-born, and that's a separate dynamic that a lot of people don't take into account versus the Hispanics that are born in the U.S. and their particular interest versus Hispanics that are foreign-born and the interest that they may take into place. But one of the things that we've seen, if you go on the next slide, is that the Hispanic population, and these were, latest estimates that we have, there's some variations of some reports. The Pew report released last week that they estimate Hispanics to be at 29%. The reports we have from the census still have it at 24. And so we'll be updating those as we feel we're comfortable with accepting the new figures. But right now, Hispanics at the year 2050 are expected to reach 24% of the American population. So somewhere between 24 to 30% is where they'll be. So a significant shift in terms of their share, whereas right now they're at 15. If we go to the next slide as well, we'll see that broken up throughout the country, Hispanics make up a very core demographic within the Southwest. So if you hit the next button, you'll see here in the key states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, there is well over 30% of the population is Hispanic, and that would directly translate into the amount of registered voters in each state and how much they can impact the election. Nevada and some of the other states, Colorado, Florida, obviously New York, are emerging also as fast-growing states. Nevada, I think, will break 25% of the total Hispanic population at the end of this year, and so they'll join a much darker blue state. So that's generally just an overview of where the population is. If we move over to the next slide, this is just a quick percentage of what the percentage of those who voted in 2004 and 2006 exit polling. So we see that Hispanics make up a significant percentage of the vote. Predominantly in New Mexico, they're the largest percentage of population is in New Mexico, so that would make a natural percentage. One of the things I want you to look at is you look at California and where they are in 04 at 19%, and what you will see at where they are in 08 when we pull up those numbers. But you'll see that there was increases in just about every single state in terms of participation between 04 to 08. So our estimates at this point are that Hispanics will be about 14 million registered voters in 2008, which is a pretty phenomenal increase within 4 years from where we were at last. We're talking several million voters who can impact several states and several elections. The next slide will also show you that increasingly, which is, we talk about transformative changes as Peter talked about. The Hispanic population in 2004 was almost split between foreign-born and native-born, and I'm pretty sure those numbers are even closer now for the 08 election. So just the demographic within the Hispanic community as well is dramatically different than it was, in '96 and so forth. So we've seen dramatic transformations within the Hispanic population. So what does all this mean? Did we skip one? Can you go back a slide? Well, great, it's not there. It's in my handout, though. So we're going to look at it. If you want to go ahead and just move to the next map, is we're going to see the role that Hispanics will play in tipping the Electoral College. You will see here that over the past 4 cycles, what this chart will indicate to you is where the Democratic Party and the Republican Party stand in terms of base electoral votes they get in each campaign. So over the past 4 cycles, Democrats have consistently won these dark blue states that gives them 248 electoral votes. The Republicans have consistently won those 135 electoral votes, with 155 being competitive. And you see there's a very huge gray area there in the Southwest. So as you move over to the next slide, you see with the core Democratic states, if the Democrats were to begin to focus on the Southwest, on the 4 southwestern states, that how that will impact the amount of electoral votes they'll get to get them the White House. If we move forward on that, just taking those 4 states instantly puts us at 277. I'll give you an indication, and I know some of these people brings up a lot of bad memories, but in the 2000 election, had Al Gore won Nevada, even if he lost Florida, Al Gore would have been our president. Everybody focused so much attention on the state of Florida and trying to win that, and yet in the state of Nevada, he only lost by 3 points, and he invested very little resources in that. That one state alone in 2000 could have shifted the entire history we've witnessed for the past 7 years, which would have made it much better. I think you guys would agree for everybody. But just to kind of give you an indication of how impactful the southwestern states can play in changing the map. So if we move on to the next state, you'll see that if you add Florida to it, so those same core states that the Democrats always win, you add those 4 southwestern states plus Florida, that now puts us at 304 electoral votes. That is a very healthy, comfortable margin that the Democratic Party wouldn't have to really focus on any of the other Midwest or southern states, and not even really have to compete in Texas, which I think is not necessary for us to ignore. But even without us focusing on Texas, these 5 states alone put us at 304 electoral votes, which is an absolutely comfortable victory for anybody leading to the White House. We move on to the next slide. All right, so in 2000, our compadre, President Bush, coming from the state of Texas, coming from a border state, having relatives that are Hispanic, he understood there was a different dynamic. He understood running for governor in Texas and running in campaigns in Texas, that there was a different dynamic occurring in our country, and that in order for him to be successful and in order for Republicans to be successful, that he had to appeal and court Hispanic voters. This was a dramatic shift compared to other presidential candidates who were largely ignoring the Hispanic vote. We saw that Matthew Dowd, his chief pollster, in various quotes, put on there that, in order for Republicans to win the White House, they had to get anywhere between 38 to 40% of the Hispanic vote. That's a very key number to remember, because largely to this date, it's still true that they would need to get about 38 to 40% of Hispanics in order to win the White House this general in 08. And so Bush courted them significantly. If you move over to the next slide, what you saw happen with Bush's strategy is that between 1996 to 2004, in 2 election cycles, Bush doubled the amount of Hispanics that supported the Republican nominee for president, which is a phenomenal shift. Simply by him putting such an aggressive effort out there, talking in Spanish, focusing on Spanish language TV, and reaching out to Hispanics, unlike any other presidential candidate had done before. And then, if we move to the next slide, bam, 2006 came around. And the GOP, in their infinite wisdom, decided to adopt a very radical anti-immigrant approach. Despite the entire agenda that Bush had pushed and Bush was favoring, a pro-immigrant community, the GOP leaders and their absolute genius thinkers decided to go a different direction. We saw, as you guys know, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, there was dramatic marches that happened, GOP advertised in several states, categorizing Mexican immigrants as terrorists, and it was just a very anti-immigrant bashing. So what did this happen? As we move to the next stage, that it encouraged participation among Hispanics. When Indiana did a poll and asked Hispanics how they felt about the immigration and whether it encouraged them to vote, 54% of Hispanics said the immigration debate has encouraged them to participate more because of the anti-immigrant stances that were taking part in this debate. And the next slide, also Hispanic turnout soared by 33% in a short 4 years. So from 02 to 06, they went from 6% to 8% of the total electorate. It was a phenomenal increase, and you guys all live in D.C., you saw what happened. Republicans lost badly. If you go to the next slide, what happened also dramatically was all the gains that Bush had made were wiped out. So from doubling from 21 to 40, Democrats regained an advantage among Hispanics from 69 to 30%, which was a drastic change within their position of how they were heading. Go to the next slide, please. So the GOP's anti-immigrant strategy was a dramatically political disaster. We saw this recently in the Washington Post, where they ran their own editorial saying the nativism was an editorial flop, that bashes of illegal immigration were failing at the polls, both in '06 and in '08. It was just a very dramatic flaw with the Republican Party. We saw states, if you move on, even Florida, that even in Republican strongholds, states like Florida and elsewhere that are typically considered safe states for Hispanics and Republicans, those demographics are also shifting also, and the Democrats are competing, if not splitting the vote among Hispanics in some of these states. You want to move forward? They're going to cut me off in about 2 minutes, so I'm going to hold on to the mic as long as I can. Despite all this failure, one of the things I want to focus on is that the anti-immigrant strategy is still prevailing within the GOP. McCain, if you want to move over to the next slide, one of the things I do want to focus on is that despite all this anti-immigrant strategy, many key Republican strategists have encouraged the Republican Party to change their positions and to change strategy to no avail. They keep pursuing this. And what we are seeing is that in 2008, the GOP continues to lose Hispanics. The report we released last week shows that of all the Hispanics who have voted so far in the primary contest, that, and these are just raw number, if you move over to the next slide, 75% of them have picked a Democratic contest over a Republican. So we're already seeing a rise again as well from where we were 69% in 2006 to now that we're averaging about 75% of all Hispanics who are choosing to vote are choosing a Democratic contest. And real quickly, if we want to keep moving.
Do you have the last few ones? Yeah.
I just have about 2 more minutes. Okay. So as we see here, this is just a show that shows for all those states that we had talked about earlier, Hispanics continue to increase their participation. Most notably was in California, where they almost doubled their participation from the '04 primaries to '08, from being 16% of the vote to being 29% of the vote. But we are seeing increases overall. Nationwide, if we look at all the states who have participated to provide data, Hispanics have increased by almost 50% versus their participation in '04, which is a huge increase. What that means, if you move over to the next slide, is that more than 1 million Latino voters have voted in '08 versus '04. I'll repeat that again. That's more than 1 million Latino voters who have voted in '08 versus '04, which is just a significant number. And if you want to move over to the next slide, we can just skip that. We've already talked about them making gains. One of the things I do want to spend time on, because it was mentioned earlier, is this McCain factor. A lot of people keep assuming that if McCain is the nominee, what that will mean for Democrats and the Hispanic vote. I'm not sold and I'm not convinced, and I haven't seen any hard data that suggests to me, and as Amy's talking about, as we're looking at polls, we're looking at research, that McCain has a stronghold among Hispanic voters, and this is not just some perception that people are believing in there. What we saw, which was phenomenal to me, is of all the presidential candidates who are running this, McCain garnered less than 50% in his own state of Arizona in the primary. When you look at how Obama did in his home state, how Mitt Romney did in Utah and Michigan, how Hillary did in New York, McCain, even among Republicans in his own state, wasn't able to get a majority of them to support him. And if you look at how Hispanics voted in Arizona in the primary, McCain garnered less than 22% of the Hispanic electorate. And on another subject, for all this talk that Obama has a Hispanic problem, Obama got more Hispanics to vote for him in the Arizona primary than John McCain did in John McCain's state. So this speculation that whether Obama's a nominee or if McCain is a nominee, Democrats are going to have a problem courting the Latino vote or gaining the Latino vote from McCain, I just disagree with it. I just don't think that that's going to happen. One of the things people are saying as well, although he's modified his immigration position slightly in the past years, he's had such a long history of supporting immigration that it's going to be hard to overturn that. Anyone here who watched the 2004 presidential election saw that it didn't take too long for a small group who invested $100,000 in a Swiss boat veterans ad to derail the entire years of military service that John Kerry had put in. I don't think it would take too long for any group to educate the Hispanic community that McCain has betrayed them and abandoned them at the time of their need when they needed him most on immigration reform. And I just don't see any data that McCain is pulling strong support among Hispanics.
Is it? You think?
Yes.
About done?
Just one more.
Okay.
And what I do want to focus on this last slide is this issue of immigration, because people keep talking about, while McCain and the Republicans keep moving to the right on immigration, it's just inconsistent with what the GOP voters are focusing on. Illegal immigration and deporting immigrants is not a top priority to Republican primary voters. It's not their top issue, and a majority of Republican primary voters, we're talking about the most conservative of Republican voters who have voted in the Republican primaries, have preferred an option other than deportation. So even among the most conservative Republicans who are voting, they don't support a deportation solution to this issue. So I think this avenue that McCain is doing to appease the radical right in his party is going to drastically hurt him in the general election. And I'll finish it there.
Okay. Thank you, Andres. And batting cleanup is Simon Rosenberg. Again, Simon, president of NDN, founder of NDN, and founder of New Politics Institute. He's also been involved in presidential politics since the war room days of '92. And so Simon is going to give the closer here, and then we'll open up to discussion. Simon?
Pete, thank you. Andres, welcome. This is Andres' I think, 10th day at NDN, so we sort of threw him in and see if he could swim, and I think he did all right today. And Joe for being with us. There's so much to talk about. I mean, this has been such an exciting season, and so much is going on that I just have 4 things that I want to talk about today. One is the collapse of conservatism. Second is how the nation's people are changing so much. Third is how the economy is going to be a major issue in '08. And fourth is what I call the virtuous cycle of participation that we're seeing in American politics today. And all of these things, I think, are new and different from what we've seen before. So for those of us who track elections, I think there really are. I do think, and I agree with Pete's premise, and obviously we wrote this in an article that you can find on ndn.org, is that I do think we're in a new era of politics. I think we're seeing the emergence of a new governing agenda that speaks to 21st century challenges and not 20th. We are seeing the emergence of new media, new tools, technology tools that are fundamentally changing the way we communicate and advocate. And third is the people of the United States are changing at such a rapid rate that all of this together is birthing a new politics. But the key also, particularly for people who've been tracking politics in Washington, is the other great change is that conservatism, which really was the ascendant governing philosophy in America, and their partner, the Republican Party, the ascendant political party in America, has utterly collapsed, right? We've seen a political, intellectual, philosophical collapse of the conservative movement that I think is on the scale of what happened with Herbert Hoover in the 1920s. And if you think about what John McCain is now walking into as the standard bearer for his party, we are able to say with a straight face that he's going to be defending the worst foreign policy mistake in the history of the United States. He's going to be defending an economy that has allowed average people now to be making less money today than when George Bush took office, before we even began to head into what will either be a slowdown or a Bush recession. That you've seen their party sacrifice core civil liberties that have made our country different and better than so many other countries in the rest of the world, and we've seen historic levels of debt and recklessness around in foreign policy around the world. That I think that this era of Republican governance, where Americans were able to experience conservative governance unfettered, right, is something that, and who rejected it outright in 2006, and as Amy has pointed out, that you've seen this dramatic shift in party ID, you've seen dramatic shift in congressional generic head-to-heads and the presidential generic head-to-heads, that for those of people who've been following politics, we are entering a period where the Republican Party and conservative movement has not been weaker, and the Democratic Party and the progressive movement have not been stronger really in my entire adult lifetime. And that is a fundamental transformation, I think, of the way you have to look at politics, because there is always this assumption, as Amy pointed out, that somehow this Republican machine and these Republican attacks are going to be triumphant. I think that whoever the Democratic nominee is, they're going to be facing, I think, an extraordinarily weak Republican Party conservative movement. And I think, and I can talk more in Q&A about this, I think John McCain was the single worst candidate they possibly could have put up in 2008, which I'd be happy to expand upon more. Second is that I think we've, on demography, I think we're going through the most profound transformation of our people in the history of this country, right? Since Europeans started coming here in the 16th century, that we are, when I was born, the country was 89% white, 10.5% African American, 0.5% other. Today we're 66% white, 33% minority, and we will be majority minority in my lifetime. And so what it means is that just if you are a person just walking around the United States and looking at the people that are on the street that you're walking down, when I was born, only 1 out of 11 had, or 1 out of 9, right, were minority. Today it's 1 out of 3. And that we are entering a completely different era of racial politics in America, and we're coming out of what we call the end of the Southern strategy of American politics, where some of the racism that was used by the Republicans to achieve power starting in the 1960s, that those racial attacks are no longer going to have the potency that they had through most of the last 40 to 50 years of politics, because our country is much more minority and we have simply become much more tolerant of otherness, right? This is a core characteristic, I think, of America as we enter the 21st century, is that there is going to be greater intolerance of intolerance. And I think it's in their party, if you want to speak to any core value of the modern conservative movement, is that they are the epitome of intolerant behavior towards otherness, right? It is an all-white party, all-white male party in an age where we now have the electorate is going to be 1/3 minority, 1/3 woman, 1/3 white male, 1/3 minority, 1/3 white woman, 1/3 white male, and they are embracing that 1/3 white male as hard as they can. 2/3 of the rest of the country is everybody else. And certainly when you look at the Democratic field in 2008, it certainly looked like the America of the 21st century. Theirs looked like the party of Leave It to Beaver in the 1950s America. And it is ironic that John McCain is playing Johnny Be Good as his theme song. It fits this party that looks like a black and white party of 1950s America. Third is that the economy, I think, is going to be a major factor in a way that it wasn't in 2000, 2004, for the simple reason that we are entering also a different age of how globalization is playing out, something that elites, I think, have had a very hard time actually coming to grips with, which is why I think this debate is only really just beginning, is that in an era where we had high GDP growth, high productivity growth, the stock market at historic highs, high corporate profits, right, by any historical measure, and great success at the corporate level in the United States, and where the upper third of the American population really soared in their income and their assets, that we've actually had people are making less money today than when George Bush came into office. The typical family's income has dropped in a period of extraordinary, robust economic growth. This has never happened in the history of the United States. We are in unprecedented, uncharted economic waters, and that the party that figures out how to speak effectively to the struggle of the middle class today, which is really driving so much of American politics, will succeed. It means that security will not have the potency that it had in 2004, 2002, 2000, in the last few elections, and that really one of the defining issues of this race, and you started to see it play out last night in Wisconsin, is going to be who's got an economic strategy for America that makes globalization works for all Americans. I'm not convinced either party has figured this out, but I think it's certainly going to rebalance the weight of economics and security as we head into '08, and I think it's going to play very bad for the Republicans who've been have been architects of this economic decline of the middle class in the United States. And then finally is that I think, as Joe talked about, we have entered a period that is really just so remarkable and I think uplifting, and a period where we should all be very proud that when the American people have been called, when they've been given new tools, when people have asked them to participate in their politics and in the future of their country, they are doing so in unprecedented levels in our history, right? We are seeing an explosion of citizen involvement in our politics, whether it's through money or volunteerism or citizen participation in the voting that's taken place. And I think what we're seeing is a renewal of our democracy in our country. I think it is a citizen-led renewal of our democracy. I think that, as Joe talked about, I think what's driving this is not just, and you hear the media sort of groping in this sort of inchoate way to figure out why it is that twice as many people are voting Democrat than Republican, unprecedented kind of stats. We've seen Barack Obama, right, winning more votes in Virginia than all the Republicans combined. I mean, these are extraordinary things that are seen to be unprecedented. And I think what's happening is, because of Joe Trippi and Howard Dean's extraordinary leadership in 2003, they have invented a type of politics where it's made it clear that people now have a meaningful role to play in the future of the country. It's a people-based organizational model that was pioneered by Joe in 2003, has been taken to a different level by Barack Obama. But the core message coming out of the Democratic Party today is that we want people, that they want people involved in a meaningful way in their politics, and people are responding. And I think that it should be incredibly exciting for all of us as Americans, for getting about which party you're in. The thing that's extraordinary, as Joe mentioned, is the Republicans have not adopted this new model of political organization, this 21st century, people-based, bottom-up organization. They're at least one presidential cycle behind. And I think the way to think about it is like the difference between using conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. They are simply not in the game on this modernization of politics that could leave them at an extraordinary disadvantage in 2008. And so to close, I just want to add this one other thing, and I've written about this quite a bit on our blog, is that because the Democrats now have become so much identified as the party of the people, because there's huge, massive citizen involvement in politics and voting in unprecedented ways, it is impossible for me to imagine that the nominee of the Democratic Party in 2008 will be not picked by the people, but will be picked through a smoke-filled room process. It is simply unimaginable for me, given what has happened this year, that a backroom deal, a group of superdelegates will overwhelm the extraordinary affirmation of the voters who have come out in unprecedented numbers to reverse the direction of where the pledged delegates are headed in the Democratic Party right now. And I think all efforts by one of the major campaigns to insinuate that it could be otherwise, I think is one of the most extraordinary misreads of where modern politics is today, to sort of reaffirm what Joe was saying, because this is now, if we can't affirm and invite and encourage the American people, right, to take back their politics, to view it as something intimate and positive and powerful as opposed to something distant and far away and not connected to themselves, if we don't understand this historic moment where the American people really are rising up to build a future for themselves that they can be proud of and that their kids can be proud of, shame on us, right, as a group of leaders in this country. So I think this fight over how the nomination is going to get settled is enormously important for the future of the party of the people and not the party of the smoke-filled room. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Simon. That's beautiful. Now, some people might have to step out to work. We understand that. But we do have some time here for questions, and we really, really want to have a conversation with people here. So we've got a mic here that's got to run around because we've got C-SPAN and others here. We have to record it. So are there questions? Raise your hands, and we'll move the mic to you. Here's the first one right here.
Could you guys comment on the gender gap and why Hillary has had such a problem this year with male voters?
Okay, everyone here?
Well, I guess you have to decide how you want to. You say why has she had so much success among women, right? You can decide how you want to view that question, right?
Or why is she having problems with male voters? Like, for instance, was talking last night, Obama was 63% of male voters as opposed to her 34%. Trends like that, why is the problem for Hillary?
To her appeal. I mean, when you think about it, kind of goes back to where her appeal has been all along in this contest was supposed to be at a very specific group of voters. Now, what we had seen over the course until really last night is that both of those candidates fit very cleanly into these different silos, and none of them had been able to break out of that. And so we had Barack Obama with independent voters, with African American voters, and yes, with men doing better. But he was never able to sort of grab onto the places where she was able to hold on to. And when 60% in some of these states, 57, 58% of the electorate is women, and you're winning decisively among that, I don't know if that's a problem that you're not winning decisively among men, because then you still win the election, right? You still win that contest. Now, the problem for Hillary Clinton that came up yesterday was the fact that he was able to break into her base among women. He was able to break in, most especially on these economic, on voters who, on economic issues, had been tilting toward Hillary Clinton. So voters making $50,000 a year or less, voters who were members of a union. I mean, those were, going back to Joe's point, but that sort of traditional Democratic base vote, she was doing very well there. And when we talk about who's turning out, now, we don't know for sure why we're doubling these numbers. We know that, yes, independents are turning out more so in Democratic primaries than they are in Republican primaries. But we've also made this assumption that Obama's ability, it's actually based almost exclusively on Barack Obama's ability to bring new people into the process, as opposed to saying, well, maybe 57 or 58 or 62% of the electorate's women because Hillary Clinton's actually bringing new women and new people into the process. So I think that had been, so again, it's a way of looking at perspective. So the bigger problem, if you're Hillary Clinton, is as you're going down through Texas and Ohio. Joe's point is a very good one about just the format of Texas. You go to Ohio, a place structurally similar in many ways to Wisconsin in terms of what the base vote is. But if she's losing it as strongly as she did in a place like Wisconsin, holding on to Ohio, I think she can still win in a place like Ohio. But the margin is no longer a guarantee.
Yeah, I would say, look, when in Iowa, where people started, women in particular, started to see her more as carrying Washington's water than their water, she didn't win women. And so when she's a change candidate, when she can really successfully push herself as a change candidate, she tends to win women really big. When, for whatever reasons, forces, going negative on Obama, I think, too harshly. So therefore, portraying herself as the old politics, not change but status quo, and so doing more damage to herself by the way she conducts her campaign, women walk away. She's not carrying our water. She's not changed. She's just the old stuff. And so I think you see this fluctuation with women where she can win them with 57%, or she can lose them like she did
50.
last night, 51-49. But she does, in a weird way, she's doing this to herself. It's sort of what I was saying earlier. I really do not understand this, the reason they set themselves up as the status quo. I understand what you're saying, but they had no choice. But I also think she could have said, look, right at the fore, I'm going to do this differently. I'm not going to take lobbyists. There's certain things she could have done. They could, they could have just said, hey, I'm different. We're going to do this a different way, and I'm going to come with a different perspective. And there's no woman out there who hears my voice every woman knows that there's no way we're the status quo. And I cannot, just simple things. I just don't get. But that's for another day.
Another question? How about on the end here?
Nobody's yet mentioned Congress. I know eight days ago there were a couple of incumbents that were knocked off in Maryland, and I can never remember that happening before when there wasn't an indictment or a major scandal. How does the kind of top-down versus bottom-up model that you've been talking about, Joe, and some of the other people, does that translate into Congress this year or in some of the senatorial and governor's races, do you think?
I think that's why you're seeing these incumbents defeated in primaries. It goes back to Amy. 2006 was change, and 2008 is going to be change. And if you're an incumbent, you can get changed out in your primary just as easily as you can get changed out in the general election. And I think this urge within, I don't, just not the Democratic Party, but the electorate for really doing something different, for really changing the way we do politics, which is what Obama's tapped into, and which, in a weird way, I agree, how McCain taps into that is going to be fascinating to watch. and I want to say one thing about this internet and new stuff, because I can tell you that the inspiration for me to really look at what we did in the Dean campaign was the 2000 McCain campaign. I remember watching these guys build this amazing internet thing in which they got 40,000 people to join and raised a couple $1 million after Iowa. And I just thought that was the coolest thing I ever saw. And I was like, if I ever get a chance, we're going to try to build it better. And we did. And now to come full circle and have it coming right back at them, and they're dead in the water on this stuff. It's just amazing to me. But to answer your question, I think you're going to see. I think you're going to see more viable primaries because you can now. Somebody can challenge a sort of establishment state senator and have thousands of people around the country send $25 and actually buck up a campaign that the DCCC or the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee doesn't look kindly on. And you started to see a little of that in 2006, by the way. And I think you're going to see it become more powerful 2008 and beyond. Those committees are going to have a little bit less power than they used to have in making these decisions.
And this feels a lot like 92, right, where we saw, which, by the way, was the trivia question, the only other state that saw 2 incumbents lose primaries, 1992 in Arkansas. Very good, Blanche brought Blanche Lambert to Congress. But the question, though, is not simply that. I don't think voters are going to go out and oust incumbents for incumbents' sake. But if you're an incumbent who has, consciously or not, gone against the will of the district, i.e. there are examples in which you no longer fit that district. And so I think for Al Wynn, for Gilchrist, some of it is catching up with. It's ironic, we had so little turnover after the 2002 redistricting, but now a lot of that is coming back to bite some of these incumbents, right? That they assumed that the redistricting didn't matter to them because they won in 2004 and they carried it in 2006. But now that is the sort of thing that I think hurt Wynn, and I also think was problematic for Gilchrist as well. So for any candidate who seems either out of step or out of touch, however that's portrayed, whether it's on issues, ideology, or style, they're going to be in trouble. But that does not mean that every incumbent suddenly has a big, bullseye on their back.
Can I just ask you, actually, prerogative of the moderator, just to talk a little bit broader on to what extent you see broader disruption through congressional races or the Senate? I mean, do you see a kind of outside the presidential election, some really big changes on the horizon here that we can expect or start watching for in 2008?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's
do you think a big
pretty
shift?
clear that Democrats are going to hold both and increase their lead. It's just always been a question of how big that's going to be. And the irony, of course, too, is that incumbents, especially on the House side, are becoming almost an afterthought because of the huge number of open seats. I mean, 15% of the Republican caucus is not coming back. That's a number we haven't seen since the 60s or the late 50s. So this is really unprecedented. And even with the Democrats' money advantage, which is also unprecedented, there's still not enough cash to go after open seats and incumbents and protect your own. So I think in some ways there are incumbents who could survive this election simply because they got lucky in that they were further down on the queue. The question in my mind is, how does this set up for 2010? All right, and that we know this, if Democrats win the White House, they're going to expand their lead in the Senate. I don't think enough that we're going to be talking about cloture-proof, things like that. I think 2 to 4 seats is more reasonable to talk about. But you got a big lead in the House, you got a majority or maybe a working majority, whatever that means now, in the Senate, and a Democratic White House. We know what this means traditionally. Bad news for the party 2 years later, right? That's always been bad. 2 years later to have to come and defend that. And if you're Republicans and you're thinking about how do we get the House back, how do we get the Senate back, 2010 is a much better opportunity. So what does matter, we know in the House it doesn't matter if you have a 1-seat majority or 200-seat majority, you still control the agenda. But it does matter how many seats Democrats add because it can increase the cushion that they have going into 2010 so that if it is a bad election, if we are still in a bad economy, as has happened with almost every first-term president, they have stumbles, that there's some give there. So that's what's going to be, I think, the important thing to look is to see how big that can be.
Pete, can I just say one thing about the 2010? I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but
we're already bored with 2008.
No, but I think it's important because I think for Democrats, there hasn't been an awful lot of governing so far since 2006, and it's been a lot of politics. And I think that there are going to be 3 issues that I think will dominate the first 2 years of the next president, and whether they're Democrat or Republican, which is what to do about the economy and to make sure more people are prospering in a global age. Second is healthcare, at least if it's a Democratic president, will absorb an enormous amount of time. And third is dealing with Iraq. Because whether you want to keep the troops in or out, just managing this massive investment we've made there, given how important it is to the American people, and frankly how important it is for our image around the world and for traditional geopolitical concerns, I think there are going to be 3 overarching things that if the Democrats don't put points on the board, by the summer of 2010, there could be, as much as there's breeze blowing more the Democratic way than we've seen in my entire adult lifetime and breeze blowing in the Republican face, it's going to be about governing stupid and starting in January 2009. And there are big, daunting, difficult things that we're going to have to do very quickly to show that there is actual change and that it isn't a hollow promise. And I think, so it's why I think this is, this city may have a year where there's going to be a lot of people seeing their kids and playing golf and doing all the things they do, but next year it's going to be an enormously consequential time in our history. And that's not even including things like climate change, immigration, make your list of other things that is on that list of things that we got to do. So it is, the next few years I think are going to be a time of enormous consequence for the country, and certainly for the balance of power of the two parties.
Let's take a few more questions. I know there's a lot of hands over here. How about in the middle there? Yeah? Can we get it run over there fast?
I share your excitement and your optimism. And, I was even excited in 2004 because I saw a lot of indicators that were positive back then. And this is sort of a fun question. How can this be screwed up? How can we screw this one up? Let's put it that way. That's a fun question. Just for fun.
Those are old politics. That's an old politics question. We don't screw up anymore. Joe, that's for you.
Well, I mean, the easy answer to that is to take is for exactly what Simon said is for the superdelegates to somehow put down whatever, and I'm talking about regardless of which way the pledged delegates are going, and I would still not today write the Clintons out of this, but I'm saying if, however that goes, the superdelegates sit down and decide no, we're going to go with somebody else, I think that would be a pretty good way to screw it up, because I think the damage done either way in terms of people who worked pretty hard for this and had it crushed by insiders would be pretty devastating. Devastating to how this could go down in November. That said, it still is McCain on the other side, and he's still going to carry George Bush's bag. So maybe even a damaged, broken party could compete, but it would make it pretty difficult, I think.
Other thoughts? Do you want to offer your?
Well,
You're good?
yeah.
All good? Oh, no? Okay, in the back? Switch, and then we'll go back. And then we're just a few more questions, and I know you got to run back.
My question is, does bottom-up politics lead to bottom-up governing necessarily? And, the fact that Hillary Clinton is running a top-down campaign, does that mean, should she pull it out, that we would have, a top-down administration? I guess as excited as I am about what Obama has accomplished so far, I feel a little bit like we're crapping on the Clintons, who are folks who are important figures in the progressive renewal in this country, and the founders of the New Democrat movement, in fact. Could there be a top-down campaign that leads to as progressive an administration as we would all hope and expect?
Great question. Who wants to take it?
I think Simon.
I think it's indicative of the campaign they've run. I don't think you're going to. I think it'd be hard to see what they would think bottom-up government looked like. I mean, compared to what Obama or somebody who ran a bottom-up campaign. By the way, I don't think bottom-up means bottom-up governing. I think it is a good thing that whoever would be trying to put their health care plan through would hopefully have millions of active Americans out there talking to their neighbors about why it should pass, so they're not being bought down by independent expenditure television commercials telling them why it's so bad and why they should stand against it. So bottom-up governing is not, if it's actively getting people to participate in the government and more transparency for what's going on, is a good thing. And I would hope that whoever gets in, whatever party gets in, that they would take the step to understand that the technologies out there right now in which the American people actually can participate in forging a new direction for the country. And I think it takes the people at the top understanding that you got to let go a little to let that happen. And that's tough. I mean, I'm not putting anybody down. That's how I was trained. I was trained top down working for Ted Kennedy in 1979. Everybody out there was trained that way. The first kids from the Dean or Wes Clark campaign that are managing House races now and maybe 8 years from now running a presidential campaign will be the first, hopefully, bottom-up trained people, and they'll have their, and they'll instantly and instinctively get it. It's not down. I'm not down on anybody. It's just a very difficult thing. In the Dean campaign, I knew I had to let go, and I kept grabbing the controls. Because your instinct is to do how you were taught. And I knew I shouldn't, and it's got to be like a stove. I'd like to grab it and I'd have to let go. So it's not their fault. It's just how the process and the system tends to drag you in that direction. And I think you're just seeing that break loose a little bit, and there's this new way. And I think, anybody who didn't see the new way, Amy said, it may have been impossible for them to see that there was this different way at the beginning of this. I think that's true, but man, did you watch 2004 or not? There could have been, you'd think there'd be a little bit of a, let's open our heads a little bit more. So I just think it's a different cultural thing that's going to be tough for them.
Sure. I just quick point on that is that the line we talk about is that when I got into politics in the 80s, a presidential campaign in your mind's eye, right, was a 30-second tarmac hit. A tarmac hit, a 30-second spot, and 200 kids in the headquarters going to work every day. And I know that because I was one of those 200 kids, right, in the 92 campaign. But now when you think of a presidential campaign, you've got to think about 10 million people going to work every day as partners in the fight and not donors to the cause. It's a completely different model of politics. It's a citizen-led model, and frankly, it's a much better model. It is a significantly better model because it's tapping into the passions of the American people about their own concerns and anxiety and hopes and fears about their future and their kids' future. And it allows you to have much more money, much more neighbor-to-neighbor kind of talk, both through traditional targeted neighbor-to-neighbor as well as virtual neighbor-to-neighbor. And it puts the American people, I'd rather have 10 million people on my team than 200 kids in headquarters, right? And that's the model, what we're talking about. And the key thing here, and this is where I think a lot of the Washington pundits have just simply fundamentally not understood, that the reason why Democrats have so much more money now is not because of the intensity gap. It's because we've adopted a completely different model of politics. And it is a better and more modern model than what we practiced in the 20th century. The Republican Party still views the internet as a democratic thing, right? That is a problem. A TV is not Democrat or Republican, it's a tool. The second thing is, on the Clinton thing, is that, look, the struggle, Bill Clinton reoriented our policies in the 1990s around the middle class. The great success of the New Democrats and Clinton government is that he reoriented the Democratic Party and put it squarely on the side of the struggling middle class, the forgotten middle class. But he did not reorient our politics around the middle class, right? Is that Bill Clinton would give a speech about the struggling middle class during the day, and then that night he would go to a fundraiser with people giving unlimited amounts of money to the DNC. And the people who were part of that, including me, were aware of how weird this was, right? So I think that Clinton reformed our policies in the 1990s as progressives, but he didn't reform the politics. And what's happening now is we're completing the circle, right? That our politics now are also being reformed squarely behind the middle class, which I think is why the Democrats are becoming much more authentic champions of the middle class, because their policies and their politics are aligned, right? And this is why when you see statistics like, do you believe the Republicans are more for corporations or for average people, and it's 70-5, right? Or that you see 90% of the voters in Wisconsin last night believing the economy isn't working for them. There is a dramatic shift that's happening in the American people today about their understanding of whether or not there are people in Washington and their leaders are actually looking out for them. And that's why this reorientation of democratic politics around people and not Washington is a game-changing event that is still, I think, not very well understood by the Democrats. By Washington, who could have believed that the Democratic presidential candidates, using $2,300 contributions, could have outraised the Republican Party by 2 to 1, by over $100 million in 2007, or that Barack Obama raised almost as much money in January of this year as John McCain raised all of last year, right? These are kind of unimaginable things. And you hear commentators say, well, there's an intensity gap. oh, give me a break, right? I mean, this is because the Democrats have embraced a superior model of organization of politics that is allowing them to raise money and involve superior numbers of people. And this will be a determinative thing, I think, in the fall elections in 2008. And I just want to say again, I got to go, and I know we got to wrap up, Pete. So,
Yeah.
but I want to say, Andres, welcome. I just want to say it again. Welcome to our amazing team. I turn it to Pete to wrap up.
Well, Simon is. I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. But let me just say, Simon, nice wrap on that. It does bring up one thing: is that we have been noticing that a lot of these tools, a lot of these new approaches, have really hit politics. But to your point, I think we're starting to see how it will start moving into government in this next the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see much more of how this bottom-up leveraging of everybody moves into government. And along those lines, I do want to end up here saying, if you like this gathering here, we have, again, 3 weeks from today in the Hilton, a day-long event on this transformation of more the agenda, the policy agenda, essentially, that's moving us into the 21st century. Terrific outside speakers, moving the big ideas that are happening in technology, economics, world power shifts, and moving that into how that's going to really affect politics in the next decade ahead. And we'd love to have you there. Go to ndn.org or newpolitics.net as well to get any of the video of this and also any of the more information on our event. So thank you very much.